A Second Chance at Love. Previous episodes are available in playlist. A link is given in the video description. Episode 53. The seconds continued to tick by, but the doors to the emergency room remained shut. Lucian's heart grew increasingly heavy as he waited in the silent corridor outside. There are at least 5 specialists in there. What is taking them so long? How is Roxanne doing? Maybe I should just open the doors and go check on her. No, I can't do that. I need to be rational here. Stay calm, Lucian. Having dismissed that thought, Lucian slumped weakly against the bench in the corridor. It's just like what the director said. Roxanne is a doctor who has saved countless lives in the past. She is kind, so I'm sure she'll be all right. For the sake of the 2 kids, she will definitely do whatever it takes to make it through. He was snapped out of his train of thought when his phone started ringing all of a sudden. Thinking that it could be something important, Lucian quickly whipped his phone out of his pocket. However, his face sank when he saw Aubrey's name on the caller ID, and he declined the call without any hesitation whatsoever. He was about to put his phone away when he noticed the time and realized it was already evening. Oh, the kids are about to get off school. I'll massaged his aching forehead as he glanced at the doors to the emergency room, which were still tightly shut, and tried to calm himself down. After taking a moment to regain his composure, Lucian dialed Caden's number. The call got through after just a few rings. "How may I help you, Mr. Farwell?" Caden asked anxiously. He was the one who told Lucian about Roxanne's poisoning, and Lucian had been gone for quite a long time ever since. As such, it was only natural for Caden to assume that something bad had happened to Roxanne. Lucian sounded exhausted as he said, "I need you to go pick up Archie and Benny from the kindergarten." Caden felt his heart sink as he figured he was probably right about his assumptions. Realizing something bad must have happened, he heeded his employer's order and said cautiously, "Understood. Where will I send them after picking them up, Mr. Farwell? Those 2 are still so young. I can't just take them to their unconscious mother, can I? Their little hearts won't be able to handle such shocking news." "I want you to send them home," Lucian replied after giving it some thought. "What if they ask about Ms. Jarvis? What will I tell them?" Caden asked worriedly, distressed for the 2 young boys. As Lucian hadn't taken that into consideration, he couldn't seem to come up with an answer. "I have no idea when Roxanne would recover and be able to go home. Also, there's no telling if she'll... Well, I can't know for sure if she'll even make it out of the emergency room alive." Caden was losing his mind from anxiety induced by the prolonged silence on the other end of the phone. After what seemed like forever, Lucian said, "Do as you see fit." He then hung up the phone before Caden could ask any further questions. Caden fell speechless and stared blankly at the screen of his phone. "Do as I see fit? How would I know what to tell them if I don't have any information on Ms. Jarvis' condition? Archie and Benny are incredibly smart, so I don't think I'll be able to lie to them, but I can't bring myself to tell them that Ms. Jarvis' life is in danger either." Caden found himself in a dilemma all of a sudden. Since class would soon be over, Caden had no choice but to suppress his feelings and steel himself while heading over to the kindergarten. As Caden was all too familiar with the path from Farwell Group to the kindergarten, he was able to get there fairly quickly. However, the mere thought of having to face Archie and Benny's questioning later caused him to subconsciously slow down a little. Most of the kids had already gone home by the time Caden arrived at the kindergarten. Pippa was the only one waiting at the front gate with Archie and Benny. Caden was hesitant to get out of the car at first as he was unsure of how he would face Archie and Benny. However, his heart ached when he saw how lonely Archie and Benny looked, and he quickly got out of the car without delay. "Mr. Lawson." Archie and Benny were expecting Roxanne to pick them up, so they couldn't help but find it strange when they saw Caden coming over. Caden nodded awkwardly at them and quickly averted his "Kaz, are you here to take care of Essie's transfer procedures? Is she coming back?" Benny asked softly before the man could even say anything. That was the only possibility they could come up with at the time. As Caden was not expecting them to bring that up, he froze in surprise when he heard that. Even Pippa's expression changed when she saw his reaction. "Is that true? I'll take you to Mr. Bauer right away." Caden flashed her an awkward smile as he explained, "Oh, I'm afraid you have the wrong idea. I only came here today to pick Archie and Benny up from school." Pippa, Archie, and Benny had confusion written all over their faces. Ms. Jarvis would usually send Lisa or Madeline over to pick the kids up if she happened to be unavailable. She had never sent Mr. Lawson over. It would make sense if he were here to pick Archie and Benny up along with Essie, but she's not attending school here anymore. It's strange that he's actually here just for them. Archie and Benny were a little disappointed when they heard that he wasn't here to take care of Stella's transfer procedures. It pained Caden deeply to see how depressed the two boys looked. This really isn't a good day for Archie and Benny. Although Pippa knew who Caden was, she decided to err on the side of caution and asked, "Mr. Lawson, may lack why you came here specifically to pick Archie and Benny up today?" Caden hesitated for a bit before coming up with a weak excuse. "Ms. Jarvis and Mr. Farwell have some business to take care of, so Mr. Farwell sent me to pick them up." While it did not exactly sound very convincing, it was still a valid excuse. Pippa lowered her gaze and stared at Archie and Benny to seek their opinion on the situation. The two boys exchanged glances as they pondered about it. "Ms. Ward has no idea how things are between Mommy and Daddy, but we know it all too well. Things are really tense between them right now, so there's no way they take care of business together." With a look of suspicion in his eyes, Archie said, "Ms. Ward, we would like to give our mommy a call." Pippa nodded as she dialed Roxanne's number and handed them the phone. Caden felt incredibly anxious when he saw the expectant looks on their faces. Ms. Jarvis is still unconscious, so there's no way she'd be able to answer their call. Sure enough, the line went dead after a while due to no one answering the phone. Upon noticing their concerned expressions, Caden bit the bullet and said, "Ms. Jarvis is probably too busy to answer the phone right now." Pippa shifted her gaze between Caden and the boys as she asked, "Archie, Benny, do you two want to go with Mr. Lawson?" Archie and Benny stared at Caden for a few seconds before nodding silently in response. Caden was still feeling uneasy even after he had successfully picked Archie and Benny up from the kindergarten. For some reason, he felt as though he could see Lucian's shadow in their eyes when they were staring at him earlier. There's no mistaking that suspicious look in their eyes. They definitely think I'm hiding something. Sure enough, Archie asked the moment he got into the car, "Mr. Lawson, is our mommy really with Mr. Farwell right now? Unsure of what to say, Caden pretended to not hear the boy's question and continued driving toward Roxanne's house. Mr. Lawson, are you hiding something from us? Benny started questioning him as well. Since they were unable to get any answers out of him, they began coming up with their own theories in the back seat. Fearing that they would end up hitting the nail on the head, Caden said, "Why would I lie to you two? Mr. Farwell gave Ms. Jarvis a batch of medicinal herbs for her research, so she's working overtime to take inventory. I think Mr. Farwell has something to discuss with her. That's probably why he sent me to pick you two up instead." Archie and Benny exchanged uncertain glances when they heard that. While they did find Caden's behavior somewhat strange, his explanation was rather believable. At the very least, it was something they actually wanted to see, so Archie and Benny decided to believe in Caden for the time being. Even so, they still couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness in their gut. "And here we thought something terrible had happened to Mommy." Caden's heart skipped a beat as he let out a forced chuckle. "No way. Ms. Jarvis has been conducting research for so many years now. You two should have more faith in her." Archie and Benny simply pursed their lips and smiled at him in response. Neither of them asked any further questions on the way home. Caden was about to breathe a sigh of relief when Benny asked all of a sudden, "By the way, Mr. Lawson, when will Mommy be coming back?" That question caught him completely off guard and caused him to break out in a cold sweat. "Well, I'm not too sure about that. We might need to wait until she and Mr. Farwell are done with their discussion." Fearing that they would bombard him with even more questions, Caden added, "Now, go on inside and wait. I'm sure Ms. Jarvis will try to come back as soon as possible once she knows you two are home safe." With that statement, he was trying to convince the kids and at the same time encourage Roxanne, who was currently fighting for dear life. Caden had no idea how Roxanne was doing at the hospital, but he believed that she would not abandon her lovely and adorable sons. Archie and Benny nodded obediently and waved goodbye at him. Caden's face clouded over the moment he turned his back on them and returned to the car. Archie and Benny waited until his car had disappeared from sight before entering the mansion. "Archie, do you think Mr. Lawson was telling the truth?" Benny asked curiously. Archie shook his head and replied with a tense expression, "I don't know." Benny clutched his chest and said, "It feels uncomfortable over here." There was a worried look in Archie's eyes when he saw his brother clutching his chest. He, too, had felt his heart racing ever since school was over, but he didn't know why. That was when he recalled a theory he had read about the bond between mothers and their children. "Oh, no. Did something bad happen to Mommy? If that's the case, why would Mr. Lawson keep it from us? Hold on. If Mr. Lawson came to pick us up from school, then Daddy must be with Mommy. Yeah, I'm sure Daddy will take good care of Mommy." Meanwhile, Estella had a gloomy look on her face as she sat in Aubrey's car. "Essie, your father wanted me to pick you up because he's busy with something," Aubrey explained patiently. She tried calling Lucian earlier, but she wasn't able to get through because he declined her call. That led Aubrey to assume that Lucian would never let her near Estella ever again. Right as she was racking her brain to come up with another solution, Lucian called her back and asked if she could pick Estella up from school. Naturally, Aubrey was overjoyed when she heard that and drove straight to Estella's school. Estella's smile faded the moment she saw Aubrey show up at the front gate. Lucian had been the one driving her to and from school ever since that incident. She only reluctantly agreed to accept the new kindergarten because Roxanne had promised to visit her every now and then. However, a few days had passed, and she had yet to see Roxanne at all. As if that wasn't bad enough, even Lucian did not come to pick her up that day. "What would you like to eat, Essie? I don't think your daddy is coming home for dinner tonight, so I'll take you out to dinner instead." Aubrey was doing everything she could to win Estella over, but Estella simply pursed her lips and stared out the window, ignoring the woman's words. Even so, Aubrey didn't give up and tried again. "How about I bring you shopping for a new toy? I saw a store selling really pretty dolls." When she glanced at Estella through the rear-view mirror and saw that Estella wasn't even looking at her, she lost it. "Lucian has been really cold to me lately, and now, his daughter is ignoring me completely. Is it because that has been visiting them?" As Aubrey happened to be stuck in a traffic jam, she decided to vent her anger and frustration by honking the cars in front. Frightened by the sudden, loud honking, Estella turned around and curled up in a corner fearfully. There was a hint of glee in Aubrey's eyes when she saw Estella's reaction. "Ha! I knew it! This little brat just needs a little bit of punishment." Estella was starting to get scared when she sensed the change in Aubrey's attitude. "I want daddy." Aubrey frowned when she heard that. She was about to scold Estella for being troublesome, but on second thought, she realized she had been presented with an opportunity to talk to Lucian. With that in mind, Aubrey flashed the little girl a smile and asked, "Do you miss your daddy, Essie? Why didn't you say so?" She then pulled out her phone and gave Lucian a call while Estella watched on nervously. "I want to speak to daddy, but she's holding the phone so far away from me. I don't know what I can tell daddy." This time, Lucian answered the phone rather quickly. Aubrey's eyes lit up when she saw how quickly the call got through. However, the smile on her face was frozen in place when Lucian said, "Essie." She shot Estella a discreet glare through the rearview mirror before saying in a sweet voice, "Essie says she misses you, Lucian." However, an inexplicable sense of unease swamped Estella. She felt so aggrieved that her eyes turned red-rimmed. "No, I want you, Daddy." Perturbed, Lucian massaged his temples and tried to console his daughter by saying patiently, "Essie, I'll be home very soon." Unexpectedly, Estella suddenly demanded, "I want Ms. Jarvis." At the mention of Roxanne, Lucian's heart promptly sank. Is this a coincidence? Why did she bring it up today, of all days, when she's been waiting for Roxanne for days on end? "Be good, Essie. Your daddy is busy with work. I'll take good care of you." Hastily cutting Estella off, Aubrey brought the phone to her ear, afraid that Estella would burst into tears if she continued with the conversation. If that happened, she would really have no way of explaining things to Lucian. "Go and get busy, Lucian. Don't worry, for I'll get Essie home safely." Naturally, Lucian could hear the agitation in Estella's voice. But in comparison with Roxanne's current condition, he hadn't the time to attend to his daughter. Thus, he merely went silent for a few seconds following Aubrey's promise before acquiescing tersely. After hanging up the phone, Aubrey glanced at the rear-view mirror. Phew! Fortunately, she's merely tearing up and hasn't yet started crying. I suppose Lucian didn't notice anything amiss. Essie, Ms. Jarvis already has her own kids, so you can't cling to her so much. Besides, she often fights with your daddy. You should be siding with your daddy. She attempted to mislead Estella into staying away from Roxanne. Estella, who was already in a bad mood that day, snorted angrily upon hearing disparaging remarks about Roxanne from Aubrey. Crossing her arms, she said nothing. The little girl's attitude caused Aubrey to grit her teeth in vexation and forced herself to suppress the wrath within her. At the hospital, time continued ticking by. It was already 7 o'clock at night, and 4 to 5 hours had passed since Roxanne was wheeled into the emergency room. Lucian had taken a seat after standing for a long time, and right then, he was again standing in front of the emergency room doors with a grim expression, waiting impatiently. What exactly is going on in there? It's been so long. Mr. Farwell, you haven't eaten, have you? Why don't we go and grab a bite together? I'll have someone keep an eye on things here. If there's any news, you'll be notified at once. Meanwhile, the director of the hospital, Zane Yaleman, was still persistently trying to ingratiate himself with Lucian. As he spoke, he cautiously lifted his eyes and peeked at the man before him. Lucian whirled around, his eyes blazing scarlet. Buzz off! The temperature around him was frightfully low. Shuddering instinctively, Zane nodded fervently. Sure. I'm going to buzz off right now. I'm leaving. Having said that, he spun on his heel and hurried away. Lucian turned back around and stared intently at the emergency room doors as though he wanted to bore a hole in them. At that precise moment, the red light above the emergency room finally went out. The doors slowly swung open, upon which 4 or 5 doctors strode out with a few nurses. At the sight of the medical team, Lucian immediately frowned. I don't see any sign of Roxanne among the crowd. Where is she? His voice was seemingly squeezed out between clenched teeth. The leading specialist hastened over and reported, "Calm down, Mr. Farwell. Dr. Jarvis' condition has stabilized for the time being." Turning a deaf ear to that, Lucian pressed with his eyes fixated on the man. So, where is she? Seeing that he was on the brink of snapping, the specialists exchanged glances. For a moment, no one dared to say anything. While we successfully saved the patient, things aren't looking so bright. When Lucian received no response after waiting for a while, the fury within him abruptly burst forth. Have the lot of you gone deaf? I'm asking you where she is. Biting the bullet, the leading specialist swiftly explained, the thing is, although Dr. Jarvis' condition has stabilized for the time being, she's still in a coma. After checking her out, our conclusion is that the toxicity inflicted damage on her cranial nerves. We're not sure when she'll regain consciousness either. No sooner had his words fallen than a gigantic hand grabbed his collar, and he stumbled 2 steps forward. Not daring to resist, the specialist could only coax, Mr. Farwell, Mr. Farwell. Calm down, Ms. Jarvis has already been wheeled to the ward. If you're really worried, you can go and check on her. Pulling the man close, Lucian eyeballed him with a piercing gaze. I didn't call you here to listen to such nonsense. I want a full recovery for her. Otherwise, what's the use of you all? Trepidation was written all over the specialist's face. I know, but Ms. Jarvis was sent to the hospital too late. If she had been brought over right after she had passed out, we could have undoubtedly cured her. It's already too late to say anything now. The golden hour has passed. I don't want to hear all this. Lucian's voice was icy without a trace of warmth. The specialist's heart lurched, and he quickly changed his tune. We'll definitely do our best and figure out a way to wake Ms. Jarvis up in the shortest time possible. After saying that, he cautiously looked at the man in front of him. But before we come up with a cure, we think she's still aware of her surroundings. Perhaps talking to her can wake her up. Lucian's hands clenched even tighter. Struggling to regain his composure, he released the man before him. The specialist instantly breathed a sigh of relief. Where is she? I'll go and check on her, Lucian demanded curtly. I must see her in person before I can rest easy. Hearing that, all the specialists told him the location of Roxanne's ward without hesitation. The entire medical team led Lucian toward Roxanne's ward. When they reached the elevator, they bumped into Zane, who had been waiting there. Mr. Farwell, I've arranged the best ward for Ms. Jarvis. I'll bring you there right away. Having said that, he eagerly pressed the elevator button for them. He waited until Lucian had entered before he followed post-haste. They all stopped before a VIP ward upstairs. With heavy steps, Lucian stepped into the ward. Zane and the specialists, on the other hand, tactfully waited outside the door. When Lucian reached the internal room door within the ward, he was greeted by the sight of Roxanne unconscious on the other side through the window on the door. Without warning, a stabbing pain pierced his heart. As Roxanne had been given emergency treatment, she had been changed into a white and blue striped hospital gown. Her soft and silky hair was tucked behind her ears. From afar, she appeared to be just asleep. Lucian stood at the door and watched for a long while before he managed to suppress the roiling emotions within him. He then entered the room. While opening the door, he was exceedingly careful, as though fearing that he would wake the person on the bed. Stopping at the head of the bed, he gazed down at the woman on the hospital bed. His suppressed emotions surged once more. After the torment Roxanne had been through, her face was drained of all color as she lay in bed. On the back of her hand with the 4 drip, blood vessels were distinctly visible. It wasn't until Lucian had personally laid eyes on her in her current state that he was snapped out of his delusions. She's really sick, not just asleep. Roxanne. Lucian couldn't resist calling out to Roxanne, harboring a glimmer of hope that she would open her eyes and wake up upon hearing his voice. Alas, there was no response from her even after his voice had rung out for a long time. Boring his gaze into her, he leaned down and drew close to the woman on the hospital bed. If she even had a shred of awareness, she would probably struggle to regain consciousness and spring away from him the instant she saw him approaching. But this time, she lay there motionlessly and allowed him to draw so close to her that they were merely inches apart. Still, the tempo of her breathing didn't even change. Only then did Lucian realize that he hadn't studied Roxanne in such close proximity in a long time. Her features were still exquisite, but she inexorably looked sickly. Looking at her pale face, a flash of hesitancy flittered across his eyes. A moment later, he slowly reached out and caressed her face with the tips of his fingers. Are you mad at me? The doctors had been working on you for hours, but why are you still not awake? Is it because you want to see me wallowing in regret? Needless to say, the woman on the bed didn't react in the slightest. Seeing her comatose, Lucian felt that his emotions would likely spiral out of control if he were to remain there. He forced himself to straighten up before fixing his gaze on Roxanne. "I'll be back in a while. I hope you're awake by the time I return." After saying that, he spun around with a hardened heart and left. Verily, he couldn't stay in the hospital room anymore. Otherwise, he himself couldn't tell what he might do. Having seen Roxanne's current condition, he felt somewhat relieved. Although he was still enraged, he no longer wore his emotions on his sleeve. Instead, he calmly walked into Zane's office. "Mr. Farwell." Right then, Zane and the few specialists were discussing Roxanne's condition. Following Lucian's entry, they all shot to their feet and greeted him. In turn, Lucian inclined his head expressionlessly. "How are things going? How exactly is she doing now? And how long will it take for her to wake up?" The few medical personnel looked at each other. The specialists had stated earlier that Ms. Jarvis' life isn't in danger at present. "She's just in a coma," Aine answered timidly. Judging from his tone, he seemed to be implying that being in a coma was a positive result. Lucian's gaze promptly turned cold, and he glared at the man in chagrin. Zane hastily went silent before gingerly trying to make amends. "Mr. Farwell, Ms. Jarvis' current condition is already the result of the specialists working on her. If you hadn't summoned these specialists over in advance, she might have very well, if it weren't for these specialists on standby, she might have very well died." "I don't want to hear that." Lucian's gaze fell on the few specialists. "Have you all come up with a method to wake her?" Compared to his threat earlier, his tone was much better then. Unfortunately, they were still helpless about the matter. "According to our findings, the substance that poisoned Ms. Jarvis is an exceedingly rare gas. Generally speaking, only major research institutes have the capability of producing such a gas. But then, researchers are also aware of the toxicity of the gas and will take protective measures when conducting experiments. This is our first time encountering a condition like hers, so we have to be extra careful in treating her," the leading specialist explained patiently. "What about traditional medicine, then? Can she be awakened with traditional medicine?" Lucian asked all of a sudden. The few specialists exchanged a glance. "We did consider that, but we imagined that the efficacy would be negligible. On top of that, you and Ms. Jarvis would have to bear some risks since the toxins had already infiltrated her cranial nerves. As Roxanne's condition had already progressed to such a point, the issue of her regaining consciousness took precedence. Then, they could continue with the next treatment. Even if the best traditional medicine practitioner were to come over, he or she might not be able to accomplish that feat. What was more, Roxanne's cranial nerves had already been affected by the toxins. If it were them, they wouldn't dare simply take the risk to perform acupuncture on the head. It went without saying that Lucian wouldn't risk Roxanne's life either. Furthermore, he was, in all honesty, reluctant to use the methods of traditional medicine. If he were to invite a traditional medicine practitioner over, the best within the country presently would be none other than Jack. Unless Roxanne's life was in danger, he would never consider allowing the two of them to have any contact. Upon hearing that it would be risky, he resolutely dismissed that notion. He then pinned a dark look on the few specialists, the threat in his voice blatant. No matter what method you use, she must wake up. If that doesn't happen, don't ever dream of working in the medical field anymore. He had always been a person who kept his word. At his threat, the few specialists hurriedly murmured an acknowledgement. All the while, they inwardly lamented miserably. It's not that we don't want to cure her, but she had inhaled too much poisonous gas and wasn't sent to the hospital on time. However, in the face of the man's threat, they had no choice but to go all out to figure out a solution. As they were racking their brain for a way to wake Roxanne, a series of knocks sounded on the office door without warning. It was the nurse who assisted in the operating room earlier. She was also the person in charge of taking care of Roxanne. I'm not sure what happened just now, but there are fluctuations in the patient's brain waves. The nurse sprinted all the way there, so she was still panting slightly when she spoke. At her exclamation, everyone in the office was shocked. During the emergency treatment, Roxanne's brain waves remained static. Regardless of whatever they did, there hadn't been any fluctuation. Yet, her brain waves had fluctuated earlier. They all felt it must have been when Lucian was in the hospital room. What did you do just now, Mr. Farwell? Someone questioned in surprise. In a daze, Lucian cast his mind back to when he was in the hospital room. I merely said a few words to her. Other than that, I can't think of having done anything special. Or is Roxanne so determined to avoid me that she'd still have a reaction to my approach even while unconscious? At his reply, the few specialists looked at each other once more. A long while passed before one of them admitted, if someone important to her were to talk to her, there is indeed a possibility of her waking up. Subsequently, Zane tentatively proposed, why don't you give it another try, Mr. Farwell? Lucian was skeptical. Will it really work? You'll know after trying. We can observe Ms. Jarvis' brain waves at all times. If there's fluctuation, it'll prove that it's indeed effective, a specialist replied. However, Lucian was still a touch hesitant. Someone important to her. Am I considered someone important to her? She wants nothing to do with me. While he was wavering, the specialist's reminder again firmed his resolve. Time is running out, Mr. Farwell. The longer Ms. Jarvis remains unconscious, the lower the possibility of waking her. At the specialist's remark, Lucian finally relented with a frown. This time, two specialists accompanied him into the ward. They monitored Roxanne's brain waves outside, prepared to notify Lucian when there were fluctuations. Hence, Lucian stepped into the hospital room again. On the hospital bed, Roxanne still showed no signs of waking up. They said you might wake up if I talk to you. Lucian walked over to the hospital bed with heavy steps. After a long moment of hesitation, he reached out and took Roxanne's hand, which lay limply by her side. For once, she didn't resist. Ironically, he couldn't muster up any joy from it. As he scrutinized her pale face, his voice lowered. What would you like to hear? As expected, he received no response to that question. Lucian chuckled bitterly. Something abruptly occurred to him, and he started, seems like there are a lot of misunderstandings between us." He pondered for a while, his gaze turning distant. "I was sincere back when I said I wanted to pursue you. Your accusation wasn't true. I courted you first before the issue with Herb's Cape group cropped up. Although the person on the hospital bed might not necessarily hear him, he continued rambling, I went to the florist in person and hand-picked the flowers I gifted you previously. I've never had the opportunity to ask you whether you liked them. But since you returned them all, you probably didn't like them, yes." At that, his lips twitched self-deprecatingly. "I don't know whether you disliked the flowers or me." Then, he divulged, "It was the first time I ever pursued someone, so I hadn't much experience. I asked Jonathan for advice on a lot of things." Recalling how Jonathan derided him, Lucian couldn't help finding it rather ridiculous. "He laughed at me several times because of that, but his ideas ended up ineffectual. When you wake up, I'll definitely go to him and settle the score." The specialists outside wore somber expressions as they observed Roxanne's brain waves. It had almost been 10 minutes since Lucian had gone into the room. While there were fluctuations in Roxanne's brain waves, they were minute. Evidently, he hadn't mentioned a subject she truly cared about, and the stimulation to her wasn't great enough. They eyed one another, none having the guts to go and ask Lucian to come out. After waiting for a while longer and seeing that Roxanne's brain waves were close to static once more, one of the specialists mustered his courage and knocked on the door at long last. Frowning, Lucian stopped talking. He lifted his eyes and glanced in the direction of the door. Through the window on the door, he spotted a specialist beckoning at him warily, signaling him to exit the ward. A glimmer of surprise flashed across his eyes, and he thought that his words earlier had worked. Consequently, his expression was expectant when he walked out of the room. They had all gotten used to his glacial expression earlier, so panic swamped them to see some other emotion on his face. "Well? Are there fluctuations?" Dipping his eyes, Lucian directed his gaze at the equipment on the table. Without needing the specialists to answer him, he had already seen the results. On the screen, the activity graph of the brain waves remained uniform. "I said so much earlier, but it all seemed to have no effect on Roxanne." As that realization dawned upon him, the temperature around him plummeted further. At the same time, a sense of defeat inundated him. "Oh well, it turns out that I'm nobody to her." Oblivious to Lucian's thoughts, the specialists cautiously explained the current situation to him. "When you talked to Ms. Jarvis just now, there were fluctuations in her brain waves. However, they weren't enough to wake her up. Greater stimulation is required." The instant Lucian heard that Roxanne's brain waves fluctuated upon hearing his voice, his scrunched brows eased imperceptibly. A specialist ventured, "Do you know whether there's anything or anyone she cares about?" In response, Lucian nodded. "Well, of all things, she's most concerned about Archie and Benny." Relief suffused the specialists when they saw him nod. In that case, just as they were going to suggest having the people Roxanne cared about to come and talk to her, Lucian coldly cut them off. "They're both kids, so I don't want them to know about this matter unless absolutely necessary." Hearing that, the specialists went silent and nodded in understanding. It was understandable that learning about their mother in a coma would be too much for two children to bear. Alas, they couldn't think of any other way besides that. After a moment of silent contemplation, Lucian announced, "I'll go in and try again." Naturally, everyone didn't dare object to that. Whirling around, Lucian entered the hospital room with huge strides, stopping beside Roxanne once more. "I've already had Caden drive Archie and Benny back. They're now waiting for you at home. How much longer are you going to make them wait?" Outside, the few specialists were filled with shock. They couldn't hear what Lucian was saying to Roxanne, but the latter's brain waves had suddenly started fluctuating violently. In a solemn voice, Lucian asserted, "You're the only parent they have. What is to become of them if you don't wake up?" Again, Roxanne's brain waves fluctuated markedly. "Then, there's Essie." Lucian paused briefly before continuing, "You promised her that you'd visit her again these 2 days. She had been waiting for you. Just earlier, she said she wanted to see you. When do you plan on keeping your promise to her?" Despite his lengthy monologue, the woman on the bed showed no signs of waking up. His brows creased even deeper, and his gaze grew darker. He went silent for an indeterminate time before urging in a deep voice, "Hurry up and wake up. As long as you wake up, I'll do anything. Haven't you been avoiding me? If you wake up, I promise to never again." A flicker of desolation glinted in his eyes as he vowed, "As long as you wake up, I can promise to never again appear before you nor allow anyone to disrupt your life." Outside the room, the few experts stared at the curve fluctuating incessantly on the screen. Every so often, they stood up and peered into the room through the window on the door. But no matter how massive the fluctuations were, the patient in the room showed no signs of regaining consciousness. Just as they were planning to go in and inform Lucian about it, the hospital room door was pushed open from the inside without warning. Lucian stalked out, looking all grim and forbidding. Sensing the chilliness radiating off him, everyone exchanged glances. While ago, they were thinking of voluntarily entering the room to notify him about the situation. Right then, however, no one dared to trigger him. Farwell, Zane regarded the man in front of him fearfully. "Your method isn't at all effective." Lucian scoffed icily. I droned on, but Roxanne showed no signs of waking up. If I were to continue staying in there, even I can't tell what I might do. In the face of Lucian's accusation, everyone hastily explained, "It's effective." "When you were inside just now," Ms. Jarvis' brain waves fluctuated greatly. The look in Lucian's eyes was frightfully grim. If so, why is she still not awake? At that question, the specialists looked at each other. "Because the stimulation is still insufficient. You must have mentioned something she cares about earlier. We all feel that she's close to regaining consciousness." Following that remark, Lucian's expression turned even colder. It left them without a shadow of a doubt that the man would dismiss them if they were to tarry any longer in offering a solution. "We propose to have Ms. Jarvis' 2 kids come and talk to her. Perhaps she'll wake up." The specialist remembered Lucian's objection a while ago, so he sounded exceedingly cautious. "Have Archie and Benny come?" A frown marred Lucian's countenance, and aggravation brimmed in his eyes. "She's now unconscious, but if she were awake, she would certainly not want the 2 kids to see her in such a condition. She wouldn't want to worry them. Yet, according to the specialists, that's the only way left. I understand your concern, Mr. Farwell. But if Ms. Jarvis remains unconscious, the kids will learn about this matter sooner or later. The later they find out about this, the greater the fear they will experience. Biting the bullet, the specialist insisted on having the boys come over. Lucian's gaze darkened time and again. A moment later, he relented. Got it. So, the specialists were about to speak further when the man before them abruptly pivoted and went back into the hospital room. Seeing that, they exchanged glances, entirely baffled. Before he returned to the room, he only said got it. What does that mean? Is he going to bring the two kids over or not? In the hospital room, Lucian stood beside Roxanne and stated solemnly, the doctor suggested that I bring Archie and Benny over to talk to you. You probably don't want them to know about this, right? After he had said that, he fixated his eyes on the woman on the hospital bed, his gaze somber. When he saw that she was still unresponsive, he finally took out his phone and gave Caden a call. It was already late at night then. Caden had just finished bathing. Unfortunately, the guilt within him kept him awake. As soon as he saw his employer's caller ID, he swiftly climbed out of bed and answered the call. What do you need from me, Mr. Farwell? Go to Roxanne's house and drive the two kids over. Lucian's voice was stained with weariness. Hearing that, Caden was stunned. Has Ms. Jarvis regained consciousness, Mr. Farwell? That was the only possibility he could think of. However, Lucian said nothing. In no time, understanding dawned upon Caden. Roxanne was still unconscious. In that case, why is he having the two kids over? At the sight of their mother unconscious, they'll undoubtedly cry. In a flash, the guilt he had been trying hard to suppress surged forward again. Since Roxanne was still unconscious, it stood to reason that Lucian must be in a foul mood. Not daring to ask any more questions, Caden merely murmured an acknowledgement. Subsequently, he got up and headed to Roxanne's house. Meanwhile, Archie and Benny weren't in bed yet. They were still sitting on the couch, waiting for their mother to return home. However, it was going to be 9:30 soon, and there were still no signs of Roxanne. They called her, but her phone had been turned off. Verily, they were both fearful and worried. Could something really have happened to Mommy, Archie? Benny grabbed his brother's hand nervously. Archie bit his lip, his heart heavy. Just when they were discussing whether to go out and look for Roxanne, the doorbell rang out of the blue. Is Mommy home? Benny leaped off the couch excitedly. Likewise, Archie sprang to his feet. The two boys trotted over to the mansion door and turned on the video intercom for a look. When they saw the person standing at the door, their faces promptly fell. Archie, Benny, it's me. Open the door, quick, and by guilt, Caden sounded incredibly gentle. The boys begrudgingly opened the door. What's the matter, Mr. Lawson? Was it Mommy who sent you here? Caden's gaze was conflicted. Yeah. I'll bring you both to see her now. The instant Benny heard that, his eyes lit up. Conversely, Archie's heart sank with worry. It's late now. If Mommy wanted to see us, she could have come by herself. Since she asked Mr. Lawson to come and pick us up, there's a high possibility that something had happened to her. Did something happen to our mommy, Mr. Lawson? He stared at Caden seriously, his expression grave. At the knowing look in Archie's eyes, Caden opened his mouth, but he didn't quite know how to tell the boy the truth. A long moment passed before he simply muttered, "You'll know when we reach." Only then did Benny belatedly realize that something was amiss. His expression gradually froze. Having long since braced himself for bad news, Archie took his brother's hand and inclined his head at Caden. "Bring us there." Caden turned away and nodded, lacking the guts to look them in the eye. Whirling around, he strode toward the car. When they reached the car door, he bent down and carried Archie and Benny into the car, one after another. Throughout the drive, all three of them were in a subdued mood. By the time they arrived at the entrance of the hospital, Zane already had someone waiting at the door. As soon as the person saw them approaching, he immediately rushed forward and greeted, "Are you Mr. Lawson? Mr. Farwell and the others are already waiting upstairs." After saying that, he shifted his gaze to Archie and Benny with sympathy brimming in his eyes. Archie and Benny keenly sensed the stranger's gaze. Once more, unease swamped them. Shortly after, they arrived at the top floor under the staff's lead. Lucian stood at the hospital room door with his face devoid of expression. Beside him were a group of terrified specialists and also Zane. "Mr. Farwell." Stepping forward, Archie and Benny went over to Lucian. Lucian tilted his head slightly at them before glancing over his shoulder at the hospital room. Even he didn't quite know how to tell the boys about Roxanne's condition at that moment. Before he could organize his words, Archie's juvenile voice rang out. "Did something happen to Mommy? How is she right now?" His voice was calm, and he sounded just like an adult. As he spoke, he even grasped his brother's hand in consolation. The young boy's sensibility made Lucian's heart clench bitterly. Archie and Benny waited for some time, but Lucian remained silent. Thus, they pinned their gazes on the few men in white coats behind the man. Needless to say, the few specialists couldn't withstand their intense stare. Just as they were about to explain, Lucian's voice broke the silence. "There was an accident when your mommy was carrying out an experiment, and she passed out. But don't worry, for her life isn't in danger. She merely hasn't woken up yet." Lucian tried his best to sound gentle and soothing. When Archie and Benny heard that, their expressions changed drastically. "No wonder we've been feeling uneasy the entire day. Something had really happened to Mommy." "Mommy," knowing that Roxanne was in the hospital room behind Lucian, Benny immediately sprinted forward to go in for a look. Lucian was already distressed because of Roxanne's condition. At the sight of Archie and Benny in such anguish, another wave of sorrow washed over him. Nonetheless, he still reached out and held Benny back. Anxious to see his mother, Benny struggled desperately. "I want to see Mommy. Mommy." Despite that, Lucian's grip on him remained firm. Seeing Benny in tears, the few specialists felt sorry for him. However, if they were to allow Archie and Benny to barge in, the boys would likely throw themselves at Roxanne and wail incessantly. That would be of no help to the treatment. On the contrary, Archie was far calmer than his brother. Although his eyes were also red-rimmed, he merely stood there quietly. "What do you need me and Benny to do?" Mommy has likely been unconscious for a long time. At the very least, she has already been in such a condition when Mr. Lawson picked us up from school. At that time, Daddy asked him to keep it a secret from us. But now, Daddy suddenly had him bring us here. As such, there must be something in which he needs our help. Archie and Benny's devastation had utterly broken the specialists' hearts. However, Archie's calmness under such circumstances left them in awe. A strange look flittered across Lucian's eyes, but he swiftly gathered his wits. He started, "Do you still remember the play we staged back then?" In response, Archie bobbed his head. Lifting his hand, Lucian stroked the boy's head and elaborated in a deep voice, "Your mommy is Sleeping Beauty right now. She's merely asleep and needs you two to wake her up. Don't cry after entering the room. Instead, talk to her." Sniffling, Archie nodded. "Understood." After saying that, he reached out and took his brother's hand. Initially, Benny was bawling ceaselessly. When Archie grasped his hand, he slowly fell silent though tears continued streaming down his face. "Can we go in now?" Archie looked up at the adults in front of him. Nodding profusely, the few specialists made way for the boys. Lucian spun around, leading Archie and Benny into the hospital room. No sooner had he opened the hospital room door than the two boys rushed over to the hospital bed on their short legs. "Mommy!" As Benny gazed at Roxanne's sleeping countenance, his tears which had finally ceased started pouring again. At long last, Archie similarly couldn't control his emotions any longer and started crying. Meanwhile, Lucian stood at the door. He waited for a few seconds before dragging his feet into the room. "Be good, and don't cry anymore. Talk to your mommy. She must be eager to hear your voices." Through their tears, Archie and Benny nodded. Lucian turned and cast a look at the woman on the bed. "Archie and Benny are here. Hurry up and wake up." Having said that, he gazed solemnly at the boys before pivoting and retreating to the corner. Flinging themselves at the hospital bed, Archie and Benny clutched Roxanne's hand outside the covers. They found her hand warm, as though someone else had been holding it earlier. Nevertheless, they hadn't the time to ponder upon it. In juvenile voices, they started speaking into Roxanne's ear. "We're worried sick about you, Mommy. Can you please not sleep anymore? We're scared, hurry up and wake up, Mommy. If you wake up, we'll behave and listen to you. We'll never make you mad anymore." As they spoke, they began choking on tears. Even Lucian couldn't bear listening to them any longer. However, when he shifted his gaze to Roxanne, he saw that her eyes remained tightly shut. Lucian couldn't help taking Roxanne to task inwardly. "Are you really this ruthless, Roxanne? Archie and Benny are in tears by your bed. Don't you feel sorry for them at all? Why are you no waking up?" Throughout it all, Archie and Benny's weeps echoed in the hospital room. Lucian forcefully slammed his fist against the wall behind him before storming out of the hospital room. Well? Are her brain waves fluctuating? The chilliness around him was so intense that it might condense into ice. If there's no response from Roxanne when Archie and Benny are crying their hearts out, I'll never let these quack doctors who proposed such a dumb idea off the hook. As a matter of fact, the specialists were also keeping an eye on the situation in the hospital room. When they saw Archie and Benny wailing, they were as anxious as Lucian. "Mr. Farwell, you can come over here and have a look." A specialist stood up and offered his seat, urging Lucian over for a look at the brain waves fluctuation. Leaning down, Lucian swept his gaze over the screen, only to see that the curve was fluctuating violently. "The curve fluctuated as well when you spoke to Ms. Jarvis earlier, but not as intense as this." Pointing at the curve, the specialist continued explaining, "It's evident that having the kids talk to her is effective to a certain degree." Lucian's brows knitted together deeply. Since Roxanne can hear the kids, why is she not waking up? The thought of Archie and Benny weeping so hard that they could barely breathe had him seized by the urge to kill the person who poisoned Roxanne. When the specialist glanced at the window and saw that Archie and Benny were blubbering so badly that they couldn't speak anymore, he bit the bullet and advised Lucian, "Mr. Farwell, the kids aren't doing so well. You should go in and look in on them." Putting his thoughts away, Lucian returned to the room with huge strides. "Mr. Farwell," sobbing, Benny grabbed his hand and led him to the side of the hospital bed. Lucian allowed the boy's sweaty hand to grab onto him. Reaching the hospital bed, he stared down at Roxanne's sleeping countenance. Sniveling, Benny asked, "Can Mommy really hear us? Why? Why is she not awake yet?" Lucian lifted his hand and patted the boy on the head in consolation. In an uncertain tone, he assured, "Yes, she has heard you. She's also trying her best to wake up. Let's help her by continue talking to her." Skepticism was written all over Archie and Benny's faces. Regretfully, Lucian didn't know how else he could comfort them. Benny couldn't resist reaching out and giving his mother a push. Following that, Roxanne's body swayed. Upon seeing that, Lucian frowned slightly. Just as he wanted to stop Benny from doing so, Archie's voice drifted into his ear. "Mommy." Archie had seemingly discovered something. He snapped his eyes up at Lucian. "Quick, look, Mr. Farwell. Is Mommy going to wake up?" Lucian's heart skipped a beat, and he swung his gaze in the direction where Archie was pointing. Roxanne's hand outside the covers seemingly twitched. In that instant, all three of them held their breaths as they stared at the hand unblinkingly. A few seconds later, Roxanne's pinky curved slightly but returned to its initial state in the blink of an eye. It was as though that was merely their illusion. Assuming that their mother would be regaining consciousness soon, Archie and Benny waited with anticipation. Alas, Roxanne remained motionless. Benny anxiously grabbed her hand. "Mommy, hurry up and wake up." "I'm scared." Frowning deeply, Lucian went over to the door and summoned the specialists. Her hand moved earlier. "Why isn't she awake yet?" The specialists' expressions turned grim when they heard that. One of the reputable doctors hurried over to the bed and performed a series of examinations on Roxanne. When he was done, he shook his head helplessly. "What does that mean?" Lucian's tone sounded incredibly cold. Meanwhile, Archie and Benny stared fixedly at the adults. In response, the specialist said, "I've examined Ms. Jarvis, and she's showing no signs of regaining consciousness. What you saw just now, her fingers curling, was probably just a reflex of her nerves. She's trying her best, too, but she needs a final push." Right as those words left his mouth, the ward plunged into a deathly silence. Only the sound of Benny's sobbing could be heard. Lucian frowned as he pondered deeply. A final push. Who else does this woman care about that I haven't thought of? Suddenly, Archie approached Lucian and tugged at the hem of his clothes. Mr. Farwell. Hence, Lucian looked down at the boy while trying to lessen the iciness in his gaze. Archie suggested sweetly, "Could you let Essie come here and talk to Mommy?" Upon hearing that, Lucian felt his heart tense. It hurt so much that he could not breathe properly. Oh, right. Essie. He almost forgot Estella was just as important as the boys were to Roxanne. Moreover, Estella was Roxanne's flesh and blood. Maybe they're connected telepathically to a certain extent. At that thought, Lucian held Archie's hand and instructed grimly, "Stay here with Mommy and keep talking to her. I'll get someone to bring Essie over now." Archie's face was wet with tears. The moment he heard those words, he broke into a smile. Mommy will definitely wake up if Essie could come. The boys could sense their mother's longing and worry for Estella. At that, Lucian nodded calmly. As he walked out of the ward, he instructed Caden, "Go to the manor and bring Estella here." Caden had been waiting in the corridor after bringing the boys over. When Caden heard Lucian's orders, he was stunned but quickly came to his senses. True. Ms. Jarvis was the one who gave birth to Ms. Estella. Perhaps a miracle will happen. With that thought in mind, Caden agreed without hesitation and hurried off. Normally, the journey to the manor would take 30 minutes. However, Caden had already parked the car in front of the Farwell residence after 20 minutes. Since he knew the password to the door, he opened it and strolled into the mansion. It was already past 10 o'clock at night, but the mansion was still brightly lit. Estella's lips were pressed together as she sat on the couch with an aggrieved look, hugging her knees at the same time. She looked as if she did not want anyone to approach her. Standing beside her was Catalina, looking exasperated. Meanwhile, Aubrey was trying to approach the little girl with a smile. That was how it had been the entire night. Catalina let out a quiet sigh of relief when she saw Caden. "Mr. Lawson, please help us talk some sense into Ms. Estella. She refuses to sleep." When Aubrey heard that, she recalled the incident where Caden had ruined her plans. Displeased, she shut her mouth. Meanwhile, Estella glanced over with a frown. "Ms. Estella, Ms. Pearson," Caden greeted them politely. Aubrey merely hummed a cold response. "Mr. Farwell has instructed me to bring Ms. Estella to him," Caden informed nonchalantly. As soon as he finished his sentence, Estella's eyes lit up, and she loosened her arms around her knees. At the same time, there was a change in Aubrey's countenance. "Where's Lucian?" There was an urgent look on Aubrey's face as if she wanted to personally bring Estella to Lucian. Lucian had been treating Aubrey coldly ever since Estella got bullied at the kindergarten. In fact, Aubrey had not met Lucian for the past few days. That day, she had a golden opportunity to wait for Lucian to return by using Estella as an excuse. To her dismay, not only did Lucian not return, but he even sent Caden to pick Estella up. Naturally, Aubrey would not miss out on that opportunity. Alas, Caden apologized coldly, "I'm sorry, Ms. Pearson. It's not my place to reveal Mr. Farwell's schedule." Aubrey's expression darkened as soon as she heard that. What do you mean you can't reveal his schedule? Don't you forget I'm Lucian's fiancé. Why are you hiding his schedule from me? Aubrey questioned, glaring furiously at Caden. Nonetheless, Caden was unfazed. I know you're Mr. Farwell's fiancé, but I'll still be saying the same thing even if Mrs. Farwell is here today. Aubrey gritted her teeth in fury. Don't go overboard, Caden. This obtuse man was the one who ruined my plans last time. And now, he's keeping Lucian's schedule a secret from me. Caden merely lowered his head and explained, if you think there's no need to hide it from you, you may give Mr. Farwell a call. He still has some time to answer some calls, after all. He'll tell you if he thinks you should know about it. Having said that, he turned to look at Estella. Let's go, Ms. Estella. Estella immediately leaped off the couch, ran to him, and held his hand sweetly. With that, Caden led the girl away. Aubrey purpled with fury as she watched them leave. I'll go with you. After placing Estella in the car, Caden shut the door and said firmly, Mr. Farwell has only instructed me to bring Ms. Estella over. If you'd like to tag along, please give Mr. Farwell a call. I'll bring you along if he gives. Aubrey's expression froze when she heard that. Strangely, she felt slightly confident when she recalled the fact that Lucian had taken the initiative to call her that afternoon. Hence, she pulled out her phone and called him. Unfortunately, the call was declined after the first ring. The screen on the phone reflected Aubrey's vicious expression. If there's nothing else, I'll leave with Ms. Estella first. I'll pick you up if Mr. Farwell instructs me to do so. Caden sounded incredibly polite. After saying that, he got into the car and drove in the direction of the hospital. As she watched Caden's car disappear from her line of sight, she snatched a handful of flowers at the mansion's entrance and watched the petals fall to the ground. Gnashing her teeth, she crushed them all. Mr. Lawson, where are we going? On their way to the hospital, Estella cast Caden a puzzled look. However, a pained look appeared on his face when he heard the question. After some time, he said awkwardly, You'll find out once we're there. Don't worry. Mr. Farwell is waiting for us there. Pouting, Estella fell silent for a while before suddenly asking, Is Ms. Jarvis there, too? She missed Roxanne terribly, especially that day. Caden merely flashed her a bitter smile, not knowing how to answer her question. Estella then added, Can we see Ms. Jarvis first, then? Just a short while will do. Then, we can go to Daddy. Caden's heart ached when he heard that. Meanwhile, Estella was staring at him with anticipation through the rear-view mirror. Gulping, Caden forced a smile. Ms. Jarvis is with Mr. Farwell. You'll see her later. Estella's eyes lit up instantly. Caden could feel how happy Estella was without turning around, but his heart sank at the thought of what she was about to see later. Shortly after, the car stopped in front of the hospital. Estella had become silent long ago. Clearly, she noticed where they were heading to. Caden, too, moved stiffly as he uttered, We're here, Ms. Estella. Come on. I'll take you in. With that, he reached out to help her out. Right then, Estella hopped off the back seat and sped into the hospital. Seeing that, Caden quickly shut the door and hurried after her. After bringing her into the elevator, he realized her eyes were already reddened. Feeling sorry for her, Caden looked away for he could not bear to take another look at her face. Thankfully, it did not take long for the elevator to reach the top floor. The moment the elevator opened, Estella rushed out and threw herself at Lucian, who was waiting outside. Estella had been worried during the entire journey. By the time she spoke, she was already choking up. "Daddy! Where's Ms. Jarvis? I want to see her." Lucian stared solemnly at Caden, who looked utterly helpless. After some time, Lucian retracted his gaze and patted Estella's head. "She's asleep. Why don't you go wake her up?" With that, Lucian picked her up and walked toward the ward. Along the way, he said, "When you go in, try to talk to Ms. Jarvis more, okay?" Estella nodded, sobbing. When she saw the boys crying so miserably, tears began to flow down her face. Lucian's heart ached when he heard Estella's sobs. Even so, he kept himself composed and carried her into the ward. "Ms. Jarvis." As soon as they entered the ward, Estella wriggled out of his embrace and ran toward Roxanne. "Ms. Jarvis, what's wrong with you? Please wake up. I miss you so much. Don't frighten me, please. I promise to be a good girl and not make you angry anymore." Benny grabbed his mother's hand and shook it carefully. "Mommy, Essie's here. Please wake up and look at her." Archie, on the other hand, was sobbing silently by the side. After watching them for some time, he realized Roxanne was still unconscious. Biting his lips, he walked over to Lucian and asked, "Mr. Farwell, can we really wake Mommy up?" They had been speaking to Roxanne for a long time. Even Essie had arrived. Still, Roxanne showed no signs of regaining consciousness. Archie could not help but doubt the veracity of the adult's words. Lucian glanced at the unresponsive woman on the bed, then at the heartbroken boy. He just could not bring himself to say anything. After all, he began speaking to Roxanne even before the children arrived. His doubts for the method were greater than theirs. However, he could not bear to confirm their doubts. After all, that was the children's only hope. He did not know how the children would react if they realized he too believed the method was not working. Suddenly, the door was opened from the outside. Lucian, whose blood was burning with unvented anger, turned around, wanting to scold the intruder when he saw the anxious looks on the specialists' faces. "Hurry! Ms. Jarvis' brain waves are showing signs of waking up." The crowd in the room were stunned. Archie was the first to come to his senses. He tugged at Roxanne's hand and called out, "Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" Benny, too, followed suit. Meanwhile, Estella stood frozen beside Lucian for some time before frantically wiping her tears and hugging Roxanne's arm. "Ms. Jarvis," Estella called out again. As if influenced by the boys, her words changed. "Mommy! Wake up, please!" In no time, cries of the three children filled the ward. When Lucian heard Estella addressing Roxanne differently, his eyes trembled, but he said nothing. He simply stood beside them and watched the woman on the bed. Maybe she'll really wake up since the specialists say she's waking up soon. In truth, Roxanne had only been unconscious for half a day, but to him, it felt as if she had been unconscious for half of his lifetime. It was the first time he realized how important she was to him. "Roxanne, wake up, please," he murmured softly. In the next second, a specialist cried out, "They are moving. Ms. Jarvis' eyes are moving." The children cried out more anxiously. "Mommy! Mommy!" In the meantime, Roxanne felt as if she were in a dream she could not get out of. At first, everything was dark in her dream. She could not see anything. No matter how hard she called out for help, outsiders did not seem to hear her. Just as she was feeling hopeless, she heard noises ringing out beside her ears. It sounded as if someone was murmuring into her ears. She tried her best to catch what they were saying but to no avail. It was not until the words "Mommy" vibrated against her eardrums. Only then did Roxanne realize they were Archie's and Benny's voices. "They're here to save me. I've got to wake up." Roxanne kept struggling, wanting to open her eyes. She tried hard until she was exhausted, but it was fruitless. Roxanne helplessly scanned the darkness around her, feeling extremely sorry for the boys. "I'm sorry, Archie and Benny. I really want to wake up and keep you company, but I just can't. Mommy." Just then, a sweet, gentle voice rang in her ears. Immediately after that, her surroundings lit up slightly. Roxanne's heart lurched, and she looked around. That voice sounded like the child she assumed had died, the child she had been constantly thinking of. "Mommy, stop sleeping." A little girl in a cute skirt appeared in her vision. Her face was blurry, but Roxanne could sense the former was crying. The girl held Roxanne's hand and led her in the dark. Roxanne was stunned to see the girl's figure, but she did not stop the ladder. Finally, they arrived before a glowing door. The girl gave Roxanne a push at the waist, gesturing for the ladder to get out quickly. However, Roxanne could not bring herself to move. She had finally gotten to see that child. Naturally, she did not have the heart to leave the girl alone. Slowly, Roxanne squatted to touch the little girl's head. However, she seemed to have noticed the girl smiling at her. Roxanne's nose stung. She wanted to apologize to the girl, but the lump in her throat prevented her from doing so. "Get out quickly, Mommy. You'll see me when you wake up," the girl urged, tilting her head. Roxanne's eyes trembled violently. "My daughter died long ago. How am I going to see her again once I wake up?" Nonetheless, the little girl gave her an urgent push. Archie's and Benny's cries traveled into Roxanne's ears again. After much hesitation, Roxanne finally stood up. Before leaving, she could not help but look back at the tiny figure behind her. The little girl waved. Roxanne forced a smile and marched toward the door. "Mommy." The children's cries were becoming clearer. As Roxanne slowly opened her eyes, she stared at the glaring white ceiling with moistened eyes. "She's awake. Ms. Jarvis is awake." Specialists who had been waiting by the door stared at her unblinkingly. The moment the crowd saw her open her eyes, they cheered happily. Lucian, too, noticed Roxanne's eyes were opened, and he was filled with disbelief. It was not until he heard the specialists' voices that he snapped back to reality. Still, he could not believe what had happened. "She's awake?" He had been waiting for so long that he was about to lose hope. And now, Roxanne was finally awake. The three children gripped her hands tightly, so tightly that she felt as if her hands were going to break. Only then did Roxanne slowly regain her senses. Even though she was in a daze, she heard the cry of a little girl amidst all the sounds. Thinking back to what the little girl in her dream said, Roxanne widened her eyes in surprise and looked in the voice's direction. The person who came into view was a teary-eyed Estella. She, too, was crying out the word mommy along with the boys. A self-deprecating smile crept to Roxanne's lips when she saw Estella's face. My daughter died long ago. Why am I still having visions like that? Archie had been controlling himself since the beginning. Though he was also crying, he was more composed than his younger siblings. Seeing Roxanne was awake, Archie could not hold it in anymore and burst into tears, throwing himself into her embrace. Mommy, you're finally awake. In the next second, the other two children threw themselves at her as well. It took Roxanne a few seconds to regain her senses before hugging them back. Though Roxanne thought Estella was not the daughter who died, she had always treated Estella as if she was her own. There. Stop crying. I'm fine. Sorry for scaring you. It's my fault, Roxanne comforted the children weakly. However, the children did not stop crying, and it made Roxanne's heart ache. Suddenly, a deep, hoarse voice rang out. Do you know how long you've been sleeping? Roxanne stiffened. She belatedly noticed Lucian was present as well. I must have lost my mind from sleeping too long. How could the children be here if not for Lucian? Mr. Farwell, Roxanne slowly released the children and cast him a conflicted look. Looked extremely restless and frustrated. It was her first time seeing Lucian looking so haggard. The look on Lucian's face threw Roxanne into a slight daze. Why is he like this? Is he worried about me? But we're not in any relationship. What's the reason that's making him so worried? Lucian let out a deep sigh of relief, feeling as if the weight in his heart was lifted. Glancing at the dumbfounded woman on the bed, he stepped forward impulsively. His gaze was so intense as if he was going to make a hole in her face. Upon meeting his gaze, Roxanne felt an odd feeling creeping into her heart, so she turned away wanting to avoid it. How are you feeling? Do you feel any discomfort? Asked Lucian before she could turn away. Roxanne's heart twinged when she heard his hoarse voice. In the end, she lowered her gaze to conceal her emotions. I don't know. It just feels like I've been sleeping for a long time. Frowning. Lucian suddenly reached out to feel her forehead. Roxanne froze, and her mind went blank. Meanwhile, Lucian placed his hand on her forehead for a long time. He did not know what was wrong with him. He was clearly aware that Roxanne was poisoned, yet he chose to show his care for her using such a poor excuse. Then again, he really did not know how else to show his concern. Even the children were stupefied. Benny asked innocently, Mommy, are you having a fever? His voice brought the adults back to reality. At that, Roxanne turned her head to dodge Lucian's hand, flashing the children a comforting smile. Just as she was about to say no, she recalled Lucian's actions earlier. If she were to deny that, then it would be even more difficult to explain Lucian's gesture. For a moment, Roxanne did not know how to answer the children. Thankfully, one of the specialists voiced up. Ahem. Ms. Jarvis has just awakened, we'll need to examine her body. Mr. Farwell, can you bring the children out for a moment? Lucian fell silent for several seconds before nodding. Let's go out first, he said to the children. Of course, the children were reluctant to leave. It had not been easy waiting for Roxanne to wake up, after all. Estella held Roxanne's hand tightly, looking utterly uneasy. She feared Roxanne would go back to sleep after she left. Roxanne could see the fear on their faces, and she could not help but feel sorry for them. Be good, okay? Go out for a while. I'll wait for all of you to come back. With that said, she patted the children's heads. Still, Estella was reluctant to leave. Darlings, please go out, okay? Ms. Jarvis just woke up, so she shouldn't get too emotional. Otherwise, it would affect her condition. Surely you don't want anything to happen to her again, right? Coaxed one of the specialists patiently. Hearing that, the children glanced at Roxanne hesitantly. Archie walked over to Estella and held her hand firmly. Let's go. We'll wait outside while the doctors examine Mommy. Seeing the uneasy look on Estella's face, he comforted patiently, don't be scared. She's already awake. Nothing will happen to her again. Only then did Estella give a slow nod and walked out of the room with the boys, glancing back with every step she took. Meanwhile, Lucian told the specialists a few words before turning around to leave. Ms. Jarvis, we never knew you were acquainted with Mr. Farwell, commented one of the specialists who had met Roxanne before. Pursing her lips, Roxanne smiled. Our kids happened to be in the same class, so we were already acquainted with each other. On the other hand, Roxanne had no idea how she would even begin to explain her relationship with Lucian to an outsider. The specialists began to give Roxanne a body checkup. I can't help but think that your relationship with Mr. Farwell isn't that simple. One of the specialists was still trying to make small talk with Roxanne. Roxanne was startled when she heard the specialist's words. She had no idea how he got the impression. He continued, Mr. Farwell was the one who contacted us urgently to come here today. We all thought that something had happened to his fiancée, and after arriving at the hospital, it turns out you were the one being brought in. When Roxanne thought about the expression that would have been on Lucian's face, a wave of emotion rippled through her heart. Mr. Farwell stayed with you for a long time while you were unconscious. He was also reluctant to let the children come because he was afraid that you would be worried, the specialist articulated each and every word clearly. Roxanne lowered her gaze, unwilling to let him see her expression. She felt incredibly guilty. Lucian had overdone it in front of the specialists. With the sort of relationship they had, there was no need to go so far for her. Based on her understanding, even she felt that Lucian should not treat her that well. She should not occupy such an important position in his heart. It's a good thing you woke up. Otherwise, I'd be worried about our future in the medical field. The specialist's tone was filled with mixed emotions. Roxanne's heart was in turmoil. Frowning, she interrupted him before he could go on. I'm sorry. I'm quite tired and wish to have some peace. Upon hearing that, the specialist realized he had overstepped his bounds, and quietly shut his mouth. The words the specialist had said were still ringing in her ears. Lucian had stayed by my side. While she was unconscious, she felt as if someone had spoken to her. Was it Lucian? Roxanne couldn't help but grow curious. I wonder what he said? Meanwhile, Lucian and the 3 children stood outside the ward. Lucian leaned against the door of the ward and gazed through the window, monitoring the situation inside. Through the window, he could see Roxanne speaking to someone. Her expression kept changing. For reasons unbeknownst to him, Roxanne suddenly turned to look at the door. Lucian lowered his gaze instinctively, avoiding her gaze. The 3 children pressed against the gap in the door, anxious to know what was going on inside. However, the door was shut tight. Naturally, they could not see anything. "Mr. Farwell, how is Mommy?" Benny asked as he tugged at the hem of Lucian's shirt. After hearing his words, Archie and Estella also abandoned their post at the door gap. They lifted their heads and stared at him pleadingly. Lucian came to his senses when he heard Benny's voice. He patted the little boy on the head comfortingly. "The doctors are giving her a checkup to see if there's anything wrong. She seems to be fine." Although the children had managed to hold back their tears earlier, the rims of their eyes were red. After hearing his words, their pursed lips turned up, revealing smiling faces. Suddenly recalling something, Lucian lowered his eyes and stared at his daughter. Earlier, Estella had followed suit when Archie and Benny referred to Roxanne as their mother. Lucian had been deeply shocked. At that moment, he had been more concerned about Roxanne's condition to dwell on it. Now that the latter had woken up, Lucian's curiosity was piqued. How did Estella feel back then? A while later, the specialists exited the ward. The moment the doors to the ward were opened, Lucian immediately looked up. "How is she?" Smiling reassuringly, the lead specialist nodded. Ms. Jarvis woke up sooner than expected. "She'll be fine since she'd already woken up. The follow-up treatment is a lot simpler. You only have to ensure that she doesn't get agitated throughout the period." Lucian nodded in affirmation and stared at Roxanne through the door. She had lain back down on the bed. As if sensing his gaze, she turned her body to the side and had her back facing the door. Lucian's eyes darkened in response. "Mr. Farwell, we'll be taking our leave if there's nothing else. I'm sure the children and you have a lot to catch up with, Ms. Jarvis." "We'd hate to interrupt," the specialist said. Nodding noncommittally, Lucian stepped aside to let them leave. The 3 children immediately rushed into the ward eagerly as soon as the specialists entered the elevator. "Mommy!" Archie's and Benny's eyes sparkled as they ran toward Roxanne. They were like 2 puppies as they looked at her with their large eyes. Estella followed behind the 2 boys. She opened her mouth but remained silent in the end. Observing Estella, Lucian noted that she had probably mouthed the word mommy like the boys. A peculiar look flitted across Lucian's eyes as he saw how timid Estella was. "Mommy, how are you feeling? Do you feel any discomfort?" Archie inquired with concern. Roxanne smiled placatingly. "I'm all right. I'm sorry to have worried you. Were you very frightened?" The children shook their heads fervently. "We weren't scared. We were only worried about Mommy." Although they had tried to reassure her, Roxanne saw through their facade and noticed the fear and worry in their eyes. Her heart ached as she thought of how they must have felt earlier. I'm really all right. I'll always stay by you. Roxanne could not help but blame herself. I don't even know what happened with the gas during the experiment today. Thinking back, she had been extremely careless. She was the only family Archie and Benny had. Therefore, she had to take better care of herself. I promise I'll never let something like this happen again. Roxanne smiled apologetically at the children. Nodding obediently, Archie and Benny tried to comfort her instead. Don't worry, Mommy. We'll take good care of ourselves and you during this period of time. Roxanne felt touched by their declaration. Benny suddenly remembered Lucian, who had been standing at the door of the ward. He turned back to his mother and added sweetly, "It's all thanks to Mr. Farwell's help. I don't know what Archie and I would have done otherwise." After this incident, the children became aware of how important Lucian was to them and they were determined to let Roxanne and Lucian reconcile. This is a good opportunity. Sensing Benny's intention, Archie chimed in, "Mr. Farwell stayed with Mommy the whole time. He even made Mr. Lawson take us home. Mommy, Mr. Farwell was such a huge help." Archie's face was utterly serious. Unsure of how to praise her father's effort, Estella settled for nodding her head in agreement. As she listened to the children showering Lucian with compliments, Roxanne felt another rush of emotions, despite having finally regained her composure just a short time ago. Back when the specialists examined her body, they had told her the same thing. She didn't know what to say and had to cut them short. Never in her wildest dreams did she know that the children would mention it again a few minutes later. This time, Lucian could hear them as he was standing at the door. She had no choice but to face him now. With that thought in mind, Roxanne forced herself to look at the man standing next to the door. "Thank you, Mr. Farwell. Sorry for causing trouble again today." Initially, Roxanne expected Lucian to either tease her in his usual manner or dismiss the situation and tell her that it was no big deal. To her surprise, Lucian's face was devoid of expression as he nodded and said darkly, "Yes, you've caused me a huge deal of trouble." Roxanne was taken aback by his response, and for a moment, she didn't know how to reply. Even the kids were surprised. "We finally created a chance for Daddy to make up with Mommy. Why does Daddy seem upset?" "Daddy?" Estella ran over to Lucian and tugged the edge of his clothes anxiously. However, Lucian remained unfazed and strode over to Roxanne's bed. Roxanne felt a chill go down her spine at the sight of his expressionless and dark gaze. Slowly, Lucian revealed, "I was in the middle of an important meeting when I received the news. I couldn't believe my eyes when Caden showed me his phone." "Ms. Jarvis, don't you pride yourself on being an exceptional traditional medicine doctor? Why can't you take the necessary precautions to ensure your safety during an experiment?" Roxanne hung her head guiltily. Her lips twitched, but she had no answer to his questions. It was true that she was careless today. Even if you don't consider your own safety, you should take Archie and Benny to heart. They have lost their father. Do you think they can handle losing their mother as well?" Lucian chided sharply. Estella felt that Lucian was far too angry and huffed in frustration. "Daddy, stop it. Ms. Jarvis is still sick." It was only after hearing Estella's voice that Lucian belatedly realized that he had become too emotional. Surprise registered in his eyes. I was too upset as Roxanne didn't take her safety seriously. Mr. Farwell, I understand that you are concerned for me, Roxanne said, biting her lower lip. She summoned the courage to meet his gaze. I acted carelessly. Please accept my apology for causing you and the children to worry. I assure you that it will not happen again. She knew Lucian way too well. 6 years ago, or even after she returned to the country, he had never lost his composure, ever. Coupled with the specialist's description, Roxanne could imagine how worried Lucian was after she got into trouble. Her apology caused Lucian to furrow his brows in shock. Previously, if he talked to her this way, they would part ways on a sour note. This time, however, Roxanne said she could understand his feelings. Lucian wondered if he was hearing things. Stella was fast to react and immediately chimed in, "Daddy was really worried about you. Look, his eyes are bloodshot. Ms. Jarvis, can you please stop being upset with him?" She sprawled next to Roxanne, pouting pitifully. Archie and Benny quickly put in a good word for Lucian. "Mommy, Mr. Farwell was worried about you and he also took good care of us." Roxanne felt a wave of helplessness overwhelming her heart when she realized the kids were siding with him. She couldn't help but notice Lucian's worn-out appearance. It was clear to her that he was really worried about her. However, that didn't mean that she could accept him without any reservations. As Roxanne struggled to think of a way to respond to the children, Lucian interjected, "This is a matter for us adults, so stay out of it. Your mommy has just woken up. You should talk to her." Roxanne felt a sense of relief deep down, grateful for Lucian's intervention in the situation. Despite that, she still dared not look up at him and only offered the children a tremulous smile. The kids stopped pressuring Roxanne for an answer. They gathered around her and began recounting the amusing occurrences at their kindergarten. Archie and Benny talked for some time when they realized Estella was silent. Growing curious, they asked, "Essie, are you happy at your new kindergarten?" They had always pondered about that, yet they never got the opportunity to meet up with Estella. When they finally met up, Roxanne got sick, and it wasn't until now that they finally had the chance to ask her this long-awaited question. Roxanne's heart sank upon hearing their question. "The previous time I visited Essie, she was bullied by the other kids. I wonder how she's doing there now." Lucian had taught the parents a lesson, but Roxanne was worried that the kids would hold a grudge and ignore their parents' warnings. She cast Estella a worried look. Estella blinked twice before turning over her shoulder to look at Lucian. "I still want to go back to the old kindergarten to be with Archie and Benny." Nevertheless, Lucian looked straight at Roxanne and explained, "Essie is doing well in her kindergarten." Her Roxanne was taken aback as she didn't expect to hear his explanation. A moment of silence passed before she nodded, her emotions a tangled mix. "I'm glad to hear that." "I was concerned." Before she could finish, Lucian cut in, "If you're concerned, why didn't you visit her for so long?" Roxanne froze in shock. "Lucian should know why I didn't visit her. After all, he saw Aubrey and me fighting that day." However, Roxanne couldn't bring herself to say that reason out loud. Lucian stared at her darkly as though waiting for an answer. After some time had passed, Roxanne hung her head in dejection. I apologize for having so many reservations. It wasn't clear who her apology was meant for. Archie and Benny shared a look as they recalled Aubrey who showed up that night. Seeing how remorseful Roxanne looked, they couldn't help but explain, "Mommy didn't do that on purpose." "That evil woman Benny!" Roxanne chided, cutting him short. Benny fell silent, looking aggrieved. He wanted to voice his complaints to Lucian, but if Roxanne refused to let him speak, he would still respect her wishes. "Mommy's sick, so I can't make her angry. I should listen to her and be an obedient boy." Roxanne stopped Benny in time, but Lucian realized something was amiss. "What happened?" he asked, furrowing his brows. Benny gazed down at the ground and awkwardly placed his hands behind his back as he vigorously shook his head. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.